It began not with thunder but with silence, the kind that falls when dignity shatters. The Duchess of Ravenshire stood beneath 1,000 burning candles, her pale gloved hands clasped too tightly at her waist as the orchestra played a waltz meant for her. Yet across the ballroom, it was another woman who moved in her husband's arms. The sight tore through the air like a cruel refrain. Whispers bloomed behind painted fans, the kind of whispers that feed upon grace until it bleeds. 6 months wed, someone murmured, and already he cannot bear to look at her. Eleanor felt each word like frost against her skin, but she lifted her chin, refusing the mercy of tears. In a world gilded by duty, heartbreak must learn to stand tall. The Duke, Alexander of Ravenshire, was every inch the figure poets once promised nobility could be, broad-shouldered, severe, his dark hair brushed to precise indifference. His reputation in Parliament was as solid as his silence at home. To the watching crowd, his detachment was elegance. To Eleanor it was exile. She watched him laugh quietly at something Lady Clarissa said, that same low laugh she had not heard since the night of their wedding. The string sword. He guided Clarissa across the marble floor, the gold embroidery of his coat gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Eleanor's body remained still, but her breath trembled as though something fragile within her was beginning to break. When the final note faded, applause rippled through the hall. Eleanor dipped into a curtsy, grace learned young, perfected through necessity, and walked toward the terrace doors. The winter night beyond was merciless, but she preferred the cold honesty of air to the heat of humiliation. Her slippered feet clicked softly against the stone corridor. Behind her, laughter resumed. Before her, the world was moonlit and still. Outside, the garden stretched in frozen quiet. White roses bowed beneath frost, their beauty made cruel by the season. She drew her shawl tighter, her thoughts unraveling with each breath. How quickly affection can turn to absence, how easily vows can become formality. They had been strangers at the altar, joined not by love but by politics. The Crown's wish for alliance, the Whitmore family's need for restoration. She had accepted her role with dignity, believing time might plant affection where duty had taken root. Yet each morning he withdrew further, until even the echo of his footsteps became foreign. She remembered their first evening after marriage, the candlelight soft upon his profile, the way his hand had hesitated near hers before withdrawing. No cruelty, only distance, worse than anger, for it offered no shape to the pain. He had murmured a polite good night and left her with a faint scent of sandalwood and regret. That scent still haunted her pillow. Tonight, as the wind moved through the hedges, Eleanor felt something inside her turn cold enough to survive. Perhaps this was what nobility required, not passion but endurance. Yet endurance had a cost, and she paid it daily in the quiet hours before dawn, when her reflection whispered questions her pride refused to answer. The door behind her creaked softly. She turned, heart leaping without permission. But it was not the Duke, it was her maid, Clara, her face pale from gossip. "Your Grace," the girl whispered, "shall I fetch the carriage?" His Grace has chosen to remain for the final set. The final set, the closing dance. Eleanor smiled faintly, the gesture thin as glass. "No, Clara. We shall leave now. There is nothing left worth hearing." As their carriage rolled away from Ravenshire House, Eleanor stared out at the glittering streets of Mayfair, at the endless carriages spilling laughter into the frost. Her husband's name carried weight enough to command silence, yet she felt like an echo wearing a crown. The gas lamps passed in rhythmic procession, each one marking another small death of hope. By the time they reached the townhouse, the city had quieted. Inside, the fire burned low. Eleanor dismissed Clara and sank into the armchair near the hearth. The warmth should have comforted her, yet she felt only the ache of memory, the faint traces of a man who had once, in some fleeting hour, smiled at her as though she were sunlight. She opened her journal, the one she kept locked within her desk, and wrote by the light of the flames, "It is not hatred that torments me but indifference. Love can survive anger but not silence." The ink bled slightly, her hand unsteady. The clock struck midnight. A knock at the door startled her. A servant entered with a folded note sealed in black wax, the Duke's crest. For a moment she imagined an apology, some acknowledgement that he had seen her leave. But the message contained only 7 words: "I have departed for London. Indefinitely. A.R." She read it twice, her vision blurring. Then she folded it carefully, as though gentleness might make it hurt less, and placed it in the drawer beside her journal. Outside, the wind howled down the chimneys, rattling the windows like restless spirits. Days passed into weeks. Ravenshire Hall stood empty of laughter, its grand corridors echoing with the measured rhythm of loneliness. Eleanor returned there after the season ended, choosing the country stillness over London's cruel gossip. She walked daily through the frost-bitten gardens, her gloved hand brushing the petals of the surviving roses. The servants watched her with quiet sympathy, for even they had begun to whisper what society dared not say aloud, that the Duke regretted his marriage. In the village church she heard it confirmed. 2 ladies sat behind her pew, unaware of her presence. "They say he dines with Lady Clarissa nightly," one said. "Poor Duchess. She has her title, what more could she want?" The other sighed. "A husband who looks at her, perhaps." Eleanor remained still, her posture serene, her eyes upon the altar. Yet beneath her gloves, her nails pressed crescents into her palms until the pain steadied her breath. When the service ended, she rose first, her every step measured and proud. That evening she dined alone in the vast hall, the candles flickering against the silver. The seat across from her remained untouched. She lifted her wineglass and, in a voice that trembled only slightly, whispered to the empty air, "To your happiness, Alexander. May it outlive my hope." Later, she sat at her dressing table as snow began to fall outside. The flakes drifted past the window pane, soft and unending. She unpinned her hair, the golden strands cascading over her shoulders like a sigh. For the first time she allowed herself to cry, soundless tears, hidden even from her reflection. Each tear carried not only pain but farewell. When the morning came, she burned the letter he had sent. The wax seal melted into a small blackened shape upon the hearthstone. Watching it curl and fade, she felt something close within her, a quiet acceptance that needed no witness. And yet, as the flames dimmed, she heard distant hoofbeats upon the drive. Her heart leapt before she could stop it. She rose, every nerve alive with foolish hope. But when the messenger entered, he brought not her husband, only another envelope, bearing the mark of a London gazette. The headline read, "The Duke of Ravenshire attends the opera beside Lady Clarissa Montrose." Eleanor did not faint. She did not cry. She merely folded the paper, placed it upon the mantel, and stood for a long moment in silence. Then she turned toward the window where the snow still fell without mercy, and whispered almost tenderly, "So be it." Outside, the wind carried her words into the cold, and somewhere beyond the hills, a man who bore her name did not yet know that the woman he had forsaken had just stopped waiting for him. The fever began in the villages first, a cruel, unseen enemy that crept through cottages and fields while London danced in candlelight. It came with the chill of spring rain and the scent of damp earth, leaving children weak and men too tired to lift their tools. By the time word reached Ravenshire Hall, 3 tenants had already been buried. The Duke was still in London. The Duchess, left alone with her conscience, took his absence as instruction and his silence as freedom. She summoned the physician, sent for food, and rode out herself, ignoring the protests of her servants. Duty, after all, was the only affection left to her. Mud splattered the hem of her riding cloak as she entered the village. Mothers curtsied with trembling gratitude, their eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Eleanor's presence was quiet, commanding. She had learned that kindness, when spoken softly, carried farther than orders shouted by men. She listened, comforted, and carried water to the fevered when others feared contagion. It was there, in those small dark rooms, that she began to reclaim what her marriage had denied her: purpose. Each night she returned to the hall, weary yet restless, the silence of its corridors mocking her. The grand portraits of former duchesses stared down as if judging her impropriety. A lady tending peasants was a spectacle for gossip, but she no longer cared. Scandal was powerless against emptiness. She dined alone, wrote letters to suppliers, and prayed only that her husband would never hear of her actions. He would think them unbecoming, unfit for her station. But even that thought no longer stung. Indifference, when endured long enough, dulls pride into something almost peaceful. One afternoon, as rain murmured against the windows, Eleanor entered the Duke's study for the first time since his departure. The air smelled faintly of parchment and sandalwood. Papers lay neatly stacked upon the mahogany desk, his seal still resting beside them. Upon the shelves were volumes of Latin verse and law, each bearing the mark of discipline that defined him. She reached for one at random but froze when her hand brushed against a small velvet box tucked near the inkwell. It opened with a sigh, the sound of secrets long hidden. Inside lay a delicate music box of silver filigree, its edges tarnished with time. She turned the key hesitantly, and a soft melody filled the room, a waltz of heartbreak and memory. The tune was not theirs, she had never heard it before. Beneath the lid, an inscription in faded script read, "To my dearest Clara, yours forever. Her breath caught. Lady Clarissa Montrose. So this was the relic of his devotion, preserved while he denied her even a glance. For a long moment she stared at the box, her pulse steady, her eyes dry. Then she closed it gently and placed a single white rose beside it, plucked from the gardens she still tended each dawn. It was not forgiveness, but acknowledgement, a quiet truce with a ghost she could never compete against. Days blurred into weeks. The fever worsened, so did the talk. A London paper, slipped into her hands by a nervous footman, carried a cruel engraving. Her husband, seated beside Lady Clarissa at the opera, their faces turned toward one another in what could only be called tenderness. Beneath the sketch, a line of gossip declared, "The Duke of Ravenshire appears reconciled with old affections, his Duchess residing quietly in the country." Eleanor read it in silence, the corners of her mouth lifting faintly, not in amusement, but disbelief at how pain could repeat itself so predictably. She folded the paper and set it upon the fire, watching the ink twist into smoke. But the village could not wait for her sorrow. The fever had spread to the children of the field hands. Eleanor abandoned decorum altogether. She rode through the storm that week, her cloak whipping in the wind, the lantern in her hand trembling as if alive. Inside a thatched cottage she found a young mother crying over a child barely breathing. The physician was days away. Eleanor knelt, her skirts soaking in the mud, and whispered calm into the air. "He will live," she said, though she did not know if it was true. The mother clutched her hand as if faith could be borrowed. By morning the child stirred. Hope, fragile as a candle flame, flickered back to life. Word spread that the Duchess herself had faced the fever and prevailed. The tenants began to call her Our Lady Guardian. It was a title that softened her nights. Yet even as gratitude filled her world, loneliness deepened its hold. She had saved lives, but she could not save her marriage. A week later, standing upon the terrace, she watched the sun bleed across the horizon. Her reflection in the glass doors was that of a woman transformed, not by love but by endurance. She no longer wept for what was lost. She had grown accustomed to emptiness, shaping it into quiet strength. And yet, some part of her still waited, an ache that refused reason. Inside, she found herself again before the Duke's study door. The music box still rested where she had left it, the rose now dried and brittle beside it. She touched the petals, whispering, "She had your heart once. I hope she guards it better than I did." Then she turned away, unaware that a letter had just arrived from London, sealed with her husband's crest. The butler approached cautiously, placing it upon the tray beside her tea. She recognized the handwriting at once, sharp, deliberate, painfully familiar. Breaking the seal, she read, "Parliament demands my attention longer than expected. Ensure the tenants comply with collection before Michaelmas. A.R." There was no mention of affection, no inquiry after her health. Only command. For the first time she did not feel wounded, only tired. She took the paper, folded it once, and slid it beneath the leg of the uneven table to steady it. That evening the storm returned. Wind howled through the chimneys, carrying with it the moans of the fevered from the valley below. Eleanor rose from her chair, unable to rest. "Light the carriage," she ordered. "We ride to the village." Her maid hesitated. "Your Grace, it is unsafe." Eleanor only replied, "So is being alive, and yet we do it." By the time they arrived, rain fell in relentless sheets. She entered the cottages one by one, distributing blankets, pressing cool cloths to burning foreheads. She had just reached the final house when her vision blurred. A sudden weakness seized her chest. The air felt heavy, the room spun. A child's voice called faintly, "Your Grace?" She tried to answer, but her body betrayed her. The lantern slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor. Someone shouted her name. Then, darkness. When she opened her eyes, it was dawn. She lay upon her own bed at Ravenshire Hall, her maid weeping softly nearby. "The physician says you must rest," Clara murmured. Eleanor's lips moved, her voice barely a whisper. "The tenants, are they safe?" Clara nodded through tears. "Because of you, my lady?" Eleanor closed her eyes, relief washing through her like prayer. Somewhere beyond the walls, the rain still fell, soft and endless. She did not know that far away in London, the Duke of Ravenshire had just read a telegram delivered to his club, a message written in trembling ink. "The Duchess has taken ill tending the fevered. Her condition is uncertain." The paper slipped from his hand, landing soundlessly upon the marble floor. And for the first time in 6 months, the proud Duke felt fear, not for his title nor his name, but for the woman whose absence might finally unmake him. The rain had not ceased for 3 days when the Duke of Ravenshire returned home. His carriage wheels carved dark lines through the flooded road, the horses panting beneath the weight of urgency. He had not slept since the telegram reached him, its single sentence echoing like a curse. The Duchess has taken ill tending the fevered. Each word struck deeper than he dared admit. For 6 months he had lived among polished marble and hollow laughter, convincing himself that distance was safety, that affection, once lost, could be buried beneath duty. Now, as the familiar towers of Ravenshire rose through the storm, he felt only the sting of terror. What if he was too late to beg forgiveness from the woman whose quiet grace he had mistaken for weakness? When he entered the hall, the world smelled of damp linen and medicine. The servants, startled by his sudden arrival, lowered their eyes. No one spoke. He crossed the corridor swiftly, the echo of his boots breaking the hush, and paused outside her chamber. Through the half-open door came the sound of low voices, then silence. The physician emerged, bowing stiffly. "Her strength returns by degrees, Your Grace." She fought it fiercely. Alexander's reply came rough and low. "She always did." He stepped inside. Candlelight flickered over the pale form upon the bed. Eleanor lay still, her hair loosened over the pillow, her skin drained of color. For a moment he could not breathe. How had he ever believed this delicate, unyielding woman to be beneath his notice? He moved closer, careful not to wake her. On the bedside table stood a bowl of wilted roses and the music box. His music box, its silver gleam dulled with dust. The sight of it pierced him. He remembered Clarissa's laughter, youthful and careless, and felt nothing. But this fragile quiet, this single thread of breath from his wife, filled him with dread so vast it bordered on reverence. When her eyes opened, the moment shattered. She looked at him without surprise, only calm resignation. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice soft as rain. "I did not expect your concern." He flinched at the distance in her tone. Once he might have matched it with indifference, now it wounded him like a blade. "You were ill," he said simply. "I came as soon as I learned." Her lips curved faintly. "The newspapers must have found it interesting. The negligent Duke at last remembers his vows." He could not answer. Every phrase she spoke revealed the quiet steel beneath her composure, a strength he had never seen because he had never cared to look. "I owe you an apology," he managed, "for more than absence." She turned her face toward the window, where rain traced faint lines upon the glass. "Words cost little, Your Grace. Do not waste them." The conversation ended there. But something within him had shifted irrevocably. That evening, unable to endure the silence of his own chamber, he walked the corridors of Ravenshire as if seeing them for the first time. The portraits, the hearths, the echo of her footsteps long gone. He stopped before the portrait of his mother, a woman whose sternness had shaped his youth. "Love makes men foolish," she used to say. Perhaps he had believed her too well. When he returned to Eleanor's room, she slept again, her breathing steadier. He left without waking her, but not before placing upon her desk a small velvet case. Inside lay a sapphire brooch, the only heirloom he had kept from his mother's collection. It was the last thing of value he could give that carried no shadow of duty. He left no note. The next morning she found it. For a long time she stared at the jewel, the blue flame of the stone catching the light. Her first impulse was to return it, to reject this sudden gesture from the man who had let her wither in solitude. But something softer held her hand. She fastened it to her gown, not out of sentiment but acknowledgement, an unspoken truce neither had words for. They met again that afternoon in the West Gallery. She stood before a window, the gardens gleaming wet beneath the sunlight's brief return. He approached quietly, uncertain how to bridge the distance he had built. "You should not be walking yet," he said. She did not turn. "I have been confined too long by illness and silence alike." Her reflection in the glass looked almost spectral, a woman caught between forgiveness and pride. He stepped beside her, his voice low. "Eleanor, I wronged you." The words came haltingly raw. "Not by anger but by cowardice. I believed affection a danger because once before it cost me peace. But what is peace without warmth?" She regarded him then, eyes luminous with restrained emotion. "You speak as if discovering humanity for the first time," she said softly. "Did you think I would wait forever for you to remember you had a heart?" Her words struck him harder than any accusation. "I thought myself sparing you," he confessed. "I see now I was only sparing my pride." He moved closer, searching her face. "Tell me, is there no path back from what I've done?" She studied him for a long, unbearable silence. "Forgiveness," she said at last, "is not given, it is earned. And I have no faith left in promises, Your Grace. Only in proof." He nodded slowly as though receiving judgment he deserved. Then let me prove it. The rain began again, a soft tapping upon the window pane. They stood side by side, the distance between them smaller now, though neither dared reach across it. That night, Alexander found himself unable to sleep. In the dim light of his study, he unfolded the letters she had written during his absence, never sent, yet kept neatly in her drawer. He read them all, each line revealing the loneliness he had dismissed as trivial. I do not ask for love, only acknowledgement. I am here, Alexander. I exist. He closed the last one, his throat tight, shame burning through him like fever. At dawn he went to her chamber again, meaning to speak, but she was gone. The maid informed him she had ridden to the village, against the physician's advice. He followed without hesitation, spurred by equal parts fear and longing. The path was slick with rain, the air heavy with mist. When he found her, she was kneeling beside a cottage door, comforting a child whose father had just succumbed to the fever. Her hands, gloveless and trembling, rested on the boy's shoulders as she whispered words of solace too low to hear. He watched her for a long time before approaching. Eleanor, he said quietly. She rose slowly, exhaustion etched into every movement. You should not be here, he murmured. Nor should you, she answered, her voice barely above the wind. Yet here we are. He reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, remorse, and the faint, perilous spark of hope. I cannot undo what I've done, he said. But if you will let me, I will learn how to stay. Her lips parted as though to speak, but a sound interrupted them, the sharp clatter of hooves upon the road. A messenger dismounted, rain dripping from his coat. For his grace, he called, handing Alexander a sealed envelope. The Duke broke the wax, his pulse quickening as he read. His face darkened. She is here, he said under his breath, barely audible. Clarissa. Eleanor's expression did not change, but her heart gave a slow, aching turn. The wind rose around them, scattering the last of the rain as though the sky itself withheld its peace. The news struck like a thunderclap. Clarissa Fairfax, once the most whispered name in London, now the ghost that shadowed every silence between them, had returned. The Duke's hand trembled as he folded the letter, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. She claims her brother's estate near Ravenshire. It seems she means to stay. Eleanor said nothing. Her face betrayed no fear, no anger, only the quiet withdrawal of a woman bracing for familiar pain. Yet within her, something cold and sharp began to stir, a warning that the fragile peace they had begun to weave could unravel with a single misstep. They rode back in silence. The road gleamed with rain, the air thick with unsaid things. Alexander's thoughts spiraled through memory, Clarissa's laughter in candlelight, her betrayal, the ruinous scandal that had forced him into a marriage of necessity. He had believed distance would spare Eleanor the weight of that past, yet now it loomed before them, uninvited and cruelly timed. He glanced at his wife beside him, her hands firm upon the reins, her posture proud despite the exhaustion clinging to her. She had risked her life for the fevered poor, and now she must battle ghosts that were not hers. Shame coiled deep in his chest. When they reached the manor, the household buzzed with rumor. Letters traveled faster than carriages, and the servants already whispered of the beauty from London who once nearly broke their Duke. Eleanor felt the weight of those murmurs like dust upon her skin. She dismissed her maid and stood before the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman no longer naive, no longer waiting. The sapphire brooch still glimmered on her gown, a gift that had once felt like a promise. Now it gleamed like armor. That evening Alexander found her in the library. The fire cast soft gold across her features, but her expression was unreadable. She is coming here, isn't she? Eleanor asked quietly. He hesitated. Only to collect her belongings. I will see to it swiftly. Her gaze did not waver. Do you intend to meet her alone? The question landed with the calm precision of a blade. It is my responsibility, he said. Yours or your desire? The fire crackled between them, filling the silence his hesitation betrayed. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Eleanor, whatever she once meant, it is done. You have my truth now. She looked up, eyes luminous but steady. Your truth changes with the hour, Alexander. You speak of love as though it were a vow easily mended. Her words struck without cruelty, but their honesty left him raw. What would you have me do? He asked. Stay, she whispered. Even when memory tempts you to flee. The next day dawned bright, deceptive in its serenity. Clarissa arrived at Ravenshire before noon, her carriage cutting through the mist like a blade. Time had not dimmed her allure. Draped in mourning black, she carried the dignity of ruin with elegance, her smile soft but deliberate. "Your Grace," she greeted when Alexander met her at the steps. "It has been too long." He bowed curtly. "Long enough, Miss Fairfax." Her eyes flicked toward the open doors behind him. "Will your Duchess not greet me?" "She is occupied," he replied. Clarissa's smile deepened and she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I never meant to harm you, Alexander. You know that." He met her gaze evenly. "You harmed yourself, Clarissa. I was merely collateral." For a moment, something fragile flickered in her eyes, regret, perhaps, but she masked it swiftly. "Still, I wonder if you can truly forgive what you never understood." Eleanor watched from the landing above, unseen. The sight below twisted something deep within her, not jealousy but recognition. Clarissa was everything the world expected of a duchess, poised, commanding, fluent in charm. She wondered if Alexander had ever looked at her with the same softness that now flickered, however briefly, in his eyes. When Clarissa's laughter floated upward, Eleanor turned away. That night the storm returned. Wind clawed at the shutters as Eleanor paced the drawing room, unable to rest. Alexander entered quietly, his coat still damp. "It is done," he said. "She leaves at dawn." She stopped before him, searching his face. "And what did she want?" "Closure," he replied. "A word that means nothing." He moved toward the fire, his voice weary. "She asked if I was happy." "And what did you tell her?" "That I am learning to be." Eleanor studied him, uncertain whether to believe. "Learning," she repeated. "Always learning, never knowing." Her voice softened. "Do you understand what it cost me to stop hoping?" He turned, pain flashing through his eyes. "Then hope again," he said. "Let me earn it." Their silence was heavy with what might have been confession. He stepped closer, his hand lifting as though to touch her face, but thunder split the air, and a servant burst through the doors, breathless. "Your Grace, Miss Fairfax, she's gone." Her carriage overturned near the river crossing. The words fell like stones. Alexander was out the door before Eleanor could speak. Rain lashed against him as he rode through the darkness, every beat of the horse's hooves a pulse of dread. He found the wreckage near the bend, a shattered wheel, a torn canopy, the driver shouting for help. Clarissa lay unconscious in the mud, her face pale against the storm. For a moment, he saw not the woman who had betrayed him, but the fragile echo of what once tethered his youth. He carried her into the nearest cottage, issuing orders with sharp precision. The physician arrived soon after, shaking his head grimly. "She lives but barely." Alexander stood aside, soaked and silent, as the night stretched into uneasy hours. Back at Ravenshire, Eleanor waited. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Still he did not return. She sat by the dying fire, the sapphire at her breast catching the faint light. It was foolish to envy a ghost, yet the ache persisted. She had offered him truth, and now he was lost again in the very past he claimed to have buried. When dawn crept pale through the windows, the door finally opened. Alexander entered, drenched and exhausted. Eleanor rose, but her voice trembled. "Is she alive?" he said hoarsely. "She called for me before fainting again." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Regret followed instantly, visible in the tightening of his jaw. Eleanor's composure cracked. "Then go," she whispered. "Finish what began before I ever mattered." He reached for her, desperate. "No, Eleanor, you matter more than—" She stepped back. "Do I? Or am I merely the reprieve between your regrets?" He froze, speechless. The morning light washed the color from the room, leaving only the hollow between them. She turned away, her voice steady but cold. "I will not compete with ghosts, Alexander. When you decide whom you truly mourn, you will know where to find me." She walked past him, each step deliberate, her gown whispering against the floor. The door closed softly behind her, leaving him alone with the echo of rain and the faint scent of her absence. Outside, the sky began to clear, but the storm within Ravenshire had only just begun. The letter arrived 3 days later, sealed in blue wax and written in a trembling hand. Its ink bled slightly as though rain had touched it. "She has passed," it read. Clarissa Fairfax was gone. There was no poetry in her leaving, no final word, no redemption, only the echo of a woman who once shaped too much of Alexander's ruin. He stood by the window as the message fell from his grasp, the parchment curling against the floor. For a long moment the world seemed still, hollowed by the quiet that follows calamity. And then, faintly, he heard the clock strike midnight, the same hour Eleanor had walked away. He had lost 2 women, one to time and one to pride. At Ravenshire, the corridors had grown colder. The Duchess had moved into the West Wing, a separation both dignified and devastating. She no longer attended dinner. The house, once restless with servants and candlelight, now breathed in muffled silence. Yet every morning Alexander found small traces of her resolve. Letters to the estate steward in her hand, lists of provisions for the village, flowers freshly placed in the chapel. She had withdrawn not from duty but from him. That was the sharper wound. He rode daily across the moors trying to outpace his remorse. The land stretched vast and grey, an ocean of heather and wind that offered no mercy. Clarissa's death had stripped him bare of all illusions. He had not loved her for years, but her end was a mirror, a reflection of what he had done to Eleanor through neglect. Pride had been his fortress and loneliness its price. One evening, as dusk draped the estate in muted gold, the housekeeper approached him with hesitation. "Her Grace is leaving, Your Grace." The word stilled him. "Leaving? For Bath. She departs in the morning." He did not wait for dawn. He found her in the drawing room, dressed simply in traveling attire, her trunk by the door. She looked ethereal in the candlelight, pale, serene, untouchable. "So it is true," he said quietly. "You would leave Ravenshire?" She met his gaze calmly. "Ravenshire was never mine to keep. You and your ghosts dwell here, not I." He stepped closer, struggling to find words that might mend what pride had broken. "Eleanor, you cannot punish me with absence." "I do not wish to punish you," she replied. "But I cannot heal in your shadow. You offered me kindness, perhaps even affection, but not yourself." Her honesty struck with surgical precision. He moved nearer, his voice low. "You have my name, my home, my protection, and none of your heart," she interrupted. "Do not mistake charity for devotion." Silence fell between them, thick and unyielding. The fire crackled faintly, throwing sparks like small stars into the air. He watched her hands, steady, poised, resigned, and realized that she was no longer the girl he had once ignored. She was the woman he had driven into strength. "Eleanor," he said, voice breaking, "you have every right to despise me. I deserve it. But if you leave now," she turned, eyes bright with unshed tears. "If I stay, Alexander, what would change? You love the idea of redemption, not the labor of it." He faltered, caught in the cruel truth of her words. His throat tightened. "Then tell me how," he whispered. "Tell me what I must do." She hesitated, and for a fleeting second, her composure wavered. "You must learn to be alone without bitterness. Only then will your love mean something." With that, she lifted her cloak and walked past him. The scent of lavender trailed behind her, faint as a memory. The door closed softly, and the silence that followed felt like the collapse of a cathedral. Days turned to weeks. The Duke became a phantom within his own estate, haunted not by Clarissa's death but by the quiet absence of his wife. Letters arrived from Bath, polite, cordial, distant. She spoke of charity events, of the sea air, of nothing that truly mattered. He replied with restrained courtesy, his ink heavy with things unsaid. Winter arrived early. Snow blanketed Ravenshire, muting every sound. One night, unable to bear it, Alexander descended to the chapel. The cold bit through his gloves as he lit a single candle before the altar. "I do not ask for forgiveness," he murmured. "Only a chance to try." The flame wavered as though listening. He placed upon the stone a small object, a sapphire brooch, once his gift to her, and turned away, unaware that somewhere in Bath, Eleanor touched her breast where its twin once rested and felt a pang she could not explain. When spring thawed the frost, a letter came addressed in Eleanor's elegant hand. "The work here grows heavier, and yet the heart lighter," it began. "In solitude one learns much of silence, and what deserves to break it." At the end, a single line stood apart. "If you wish to speak, come without promise, only truth." He left that very night. The road was long, the journey slow, but his resolve did not waver. When at last he reached Bath, he found her tending to a garden outside the charitable house she managed. The sun fell through the leaves, gilding her hair. For a moment he only watched, afraid that words might break the fragile beauty of her peace. She saw him then. Her expression was unreadable. He removed his hat, his voice rough. "I received your letter." "Then you know I did not invite apology," she said. "Only honesty." He nodded. "Then honesty you shall have." He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "I was a coward, Eleanor. I mistook silence for strength, pride for dignity. I thought love could be restrained and still remain. I was wrong." He paused, searching her eyes. "I do not ask you to return. I ask only that you believe this. I have not known peace since you left." The wind stirred between them, carrying the faint scent of roses. Eleanor's gaze softened, though her voice remained steady. "Peace cannot be built upon regret alone." "Then let it begin with truth," he said. "If I must spend a lifetime proving it, I will." For the first time in months, a faint smile touched her lips. "You are late, Alexander," she murmured. 6 months too late." He lowered his head. "Then let this night be our beginning, not our ending." A long silence followed, gentle, uncertain, alive with everything unsaid. The world around them seemed to still. Then Eleanor reached forward, taking his hand. "If you falter again," she whispered, "I will not wait another 6 months. I will not give you reason to." His voice trembled with conviction. Their hands remained joined, fragile but certain, as though the ghosts of the past had finally loosened their hold. Above them, church bells began to ring, distant yet clear, a promise of morning. And as the last note faded, the narrator's voice would carry softly through the hush. For 6 months the Duke ignored his wife, until one night, he realized he could not live without her. But love, once neglected, demands not apology, but rebirth. And in that breath between night and dawn, they stood, no longer strangers bound by duty, but two souls learning at last to begin.